Hi everyone, and welcome to our February webinar. Today we're going to turn our attention to 4 key strategies for improving farm profitability. This month, our subject matter expert is Daniel Hedgecock, and we're going to share more about his background here in a minute. Today's subject matter expert is Daniel Hedgecock. Daniel is the president of Vantage South Atlantic, a full-service precision agriculture technology solutions provider. His company and their team, they're experts on the Trimble Precision Ag portfolio, and they work with farmers in North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. Daniel works to help his farmer customers adopt and really perfect precision ag strategies that drive farm profitability. So let's get started now as Daniel walks us through 4 key strategies for improving your farm's profitability. Daniel, first, why is this topic so important?
Well, from my perspective, I think, we're in the business of precision ag, and any precision ag tool should help to increase farm profitability. The reason I probably brought it up is so relevant in North Carolina and Virginia because of our recent hurricanes and commodity prices, and we have quite a few farmers that are going out of business around us, and some of the larger farmers are starting to consolidate. And I think the farmers that have been conservative in the past and, not just went out and spent money on extra seed or extra fertilizer, not knowing if it would really pay off or not. The farmers that were doing some of these things to increase farm profitability and conserving some of that cash, once they hit this cash flow point they're at right now, they were actually able to buy up a lot of land or rent land that other farmers who went out of business were able to get. So I think it's critical in the market we're in right now that, we have to look at farm profitability. We can't think of it as, I want to farm more acres, I want to yield more on the farm. Yielding more is fine as long as I'm being more profitable. But if I was able to farm 2,000 acres and make just as much money as if I were to farm 3,000 acres, then what's the point of farming 3,000 acres?
Yeah.
So it's really working smarter, not harder.
Now it's time to dive into the 4 key strategies to improve farm profitability. Okay, let's start with the first strategy around setting goals. Why is this so important for farmers?
I always like to understand, especially the first time I meet a farmer, is what are the goals for your farm? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And that may be more of an interview question, but I really want to know, being a precision ag provider, what are ways I can help you? And I don't know that unless you tell me where you're at and where you want to go. So I just broke them up into small term and short term. Long term, some of those goals may be, in 5 years, I want to be farming this many acres, or in 5 years, I would like to have my planner being able to do variable rate. I'd like to do variable rate everything. Short term may be, I want to start to use the data I'm collecting, and that helps me to wrap my mind around how can I align the tools that I have in my bag to be able to help a farmer actually achieve those goals. And I can also help them to say, hey, your goals, I hear what you're saying, but that's maybe not a 2-year goal. That might be more of a 5-year goal. So helping them to set up realistic expectations is also beneficial.
Okay. So you start with a long-term goal, and then the short-term goals are really just how to get you to that long-term.
Yeah, that's right. If I can make small differences each day, then I believe that really adds up to get me to those long-term goals versus me saying, I'm a 2,000 acre farmer, and next year I want to farm more acres. I want to buy a new combine. All that might be great, but is it really going to help your bottom line? And those short-term goals really start to add up if you can make a little difference, each year or each week, each crop. versus trying to say, hey, I want to go 300 bushel corn. Well, you haven't grown 200 bushel corn yet, so we need to get to the 200 bushel mark before we get to the 300 bushel mark. But even then, what's the point of growing 300 bushels? Is it just out of joy, or are we trying to learn from that? And because we know it's not possible if I'm a large farmer to grow 300 bushels across the whole farm. Not with what's in place today.
Is there an idea out there by farmers that if I have a larger operation, my profits are going to go up? Is it a bit of a myth?
I believe so. I think one thing you hear a lot is, well, that's just the way we've always done it. And just because you've always done it that way, your father's done it that way, or your grandfather, that doesn't mean that you need to do it that way. And as the new generation of farmers start to take over, I think that mindset is starting to shift. Before it was, okay, we're just gonna, the only way to make more money is to farm more acres.
Yeah.
And I don't think that should be our philosophy. Should be, how can I make the most money? And I think that more acres will come over time as a result. But I don't understand the philosophy of saying, okay, one of my 5-year goals is to farm more acres. One of my 5-year goals should be, I want to be more profitable, and that might include farming more acres. But I think we all know that, there's some parts of fields that aren't ever profitable. And why do we continue to run the planter over those versus just letting them lay fallow, maybe still paying the rent just to get the rest of the farm if it's worth it. But as some farmers start to go out of business or retire and other farmers come in to consolidate, they should know if it's worth farming that piece of land or not, versus just saying, okay, great, I got 500 more acres I can add to my bottom line. I think we all fall into this trap. It's bigger and is better. And, a farmer gets a bigger sprayer. Well, they need more acres to cover to justify getting that bigger sprayer. So I think the equipment piece plays into it as well.
As farmers shift their focus to growing more profitable acres, does that inevitably bring them around to precision ag?
Yeah, I think it has to. In my opinion, the purpose of precision ag is to control the variability that occurs in the field. We're striving to get to that point to where we are managing each plant, and we still have a long ways to go, but It's amazing to see some of the new technology in the industry coming out to actually help us start to not make farming such a guessing game, actually making decisions based off of data that we're collecting in the field. So I think without some of those technology pieces or that data we're collecting, which is precision ag, I don't think that we can achieve those goals.
Can you explain the difference between managing by field versus managing by the entire crop?
Yeah, it's always interesting to me, and everything we talk about today is, again, is from my perspective. I believe farmers have a very full plate, and they're going in a uphill direction. What they do is very tough, so it's not an easy job whatsoever. So when I ask growers, are you able to actually tell me what each field yielded, right? And in North Carolina, your average field size probably, if I had to guess, 30 acres, maybe your average field size across the whole state. So if I'm growing peanuts, or if I'm growing cotton, or if I'm growing sweet potatoes, sometimes that may be difficult because there's no yield monitor. So unless I'm actually tracking that information, I can tell you what my yield was for the crop, but I can't necessarily tell you what it was for the field. So just like with variable rate technology, being able to vary rates of fertilizer or seed, we have to have a yield goal in mind so that all of our numbers add up. and, getting away from the flat rate philosophy into more of a variable rate philosophy, I think that's the right way to go, but we have to make sure we do it with the right philosophy behind us. Yield goals by field versus saying, okay, the North Carolina average for corn over the past 5 years was 142 bushels. So as long as I'm hitting 142 bushels, I'm happy. Well, if you're striving for 142 bushels, again, that's an average across the whole farm. And if we took a small step backwards and said, okay, my goal is to break 142 bushels, but I need to set realistic goals for each field. So now, instead of trying to hit 142 bushels on a field that only has 100 bushel potential, maybe I shoot toward 100 and reallocate some of those resources toward a field that has 175 bushel potential.
Right.
So I make those small gains, and now instead of shooting for 142 bushels across the whole crop, I'm shooting for 155. But I was able to do that because I made those small leaps on each field. And I think that's the only way to do it. It's no different than me going to a college and taking a semester of a class. And, there's 4 tests during the year, and I made 100 on 3 of them, but one of the tests I made a 0. So my average for that semester was 75, right? If I would have made a 50 on that test, it would have been marginally better overall. So I think taking that into account and making those small adjustments per field is really important.
What percentage of the growers that you work with today are farming this way?
It really surprises me. And again, I don't think it's because they want to farm like this, but they have so much on their plate and they really need some type of tool or some type of service provider to come in there and help them with it. Because it's no different than, me hiring an accountant to do my taxes. I probably could sit down and do my taxes, but if I'm self-employed and, my wife's not, then that's a whole different ball game versus, both of us having W-2s in front of us. So no different than me hiring an accountant. I believe farmers should hire these precision ag consultants or profitability consultants to come in and help them. And those profitability consultants, they're nothing more than data crunchers. I'm just sitting there telling a farmer, hey, this is what you did on your farm. Now you tell me where your goals lie, and I'll help I'll help you achieve those through these marginal gains. So again, I'm surprised with some of the progressive farmers that we have in our area, and they don't farm like this. And I believe in a time to where farm margins are tight, I get some pushback that, well, I completely agree with what you're saying, and I want to do that, but I don't have the extra money right now to invest in that. And that usually surprises me because, if you break down a pie chart of average cost for a particular crop on a particular field, seed is probably around 25%, fertilizer is probably 50%. So 75% of that money is going to your input provider, and oftentimes they're the ones that get the agronomy business. And in my view, I think it should be an independent group that's helping them manage that data so that they can make better buying decisions or better product decisions. The input suppliers are definitely experts in their field, but when it comes to spatial data management, I feel like a precision ag retailer is really the way to go. At the end of the day, there's not much money left for the farmer to make.
Right.
If he's spending most of it on new equipment or on more fertilizer or more seed. And like I said, that goes into my next point, know your point of diminishing returns. Mm-hmm. If just because I'm growing a 250 bushel corn crop doesn't mean that I made more money than growing a 200 bushel corn crop. And I think the farmers will start to either do their own research or let someone like our organization, for example, help them to collect this data and sit down and go over it, then we can start to come up with a better game plan and make those small gains year over year when it comes to profitability.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that it's pretty convincing once you actually can show the grower the data?
Oh, it's amazing because, yield monitors have been around for since 92, 93. We actually had yield monitors in the combine, and then along came yield mapping about the same time. RTK and autopilot really took off, and now we see most combines have some type of yield monitoring system. Most tractors have some type of autopilot system, and we're still not using that data. And that's one of the first things that we implemented on the farm when it comes to precision ag was yield monitoring. Yeah. But we're still not using that data in the correct method, and that's what's so surprising to me. So to be able to take that data, and this is very simple, take the data off the combine, and Trimble's just come out with a new yield cleaning tool that's really nice because it helps you to kind of get rid of some of those outlier numbers that we had to guess and filter through ourselves. So we clean the yield data, and then the only thing we take from that is either our as-applied maps, or if the grower doesn't have as-applied maps, we take their original prescription. And we start to stack those data layers and apply cost to them, and we're looking at, our profitability map, we're looking at a yield map, and we're looking at a cost per unit production map. And 9 times out of 10, all 3 maps look totally different from one another. Oh. And it's crazy. It's crazy to see because, the more variability I enter into the operation, just because I put more seed underneath a pivot, just because I put more water, more fertilizer, doesn't mean I made more money underneath that pivot than I did outside. And it's really exciting to see the light bulb go off in the grower's mind that, wow, I actually did better in some of the dry land corners. Why was that? And I think that's the point to where you say, okay, it was because of this variety, or it was because of this weather condition, or is because of this pH or water management that we weren't able to be as profitable in that area of the field. And that's really neat to see. But again, we're doing something as simple as just taking yield data and applying our cost and taking our as-applied maps and just showing the grower what they did. I mean, we're not telling them they need to do anything different. We're just saying, hey, here's what you did.
Right.
Now let's have a conversation on what could we have done different.
So it sounds like this cost per unit production is really key, understanding that calculation.
Yeah, I think it's all about keeping track of what you did, and as long as you can keep track of what you did, it's just like balancing your checkbook.
Yeah.
If I have X amount of money in the bank, and at the end, I was shooting to save $500 this month, but I only saved $300. Well, why was that? Well, we went out to eat 4 more times than we really should have, right? So starting to kind of adjust that is important because it helps you to be more conservative, I think, or be able to take more educated risks versus just a risk.
Let's move to point 3, to track and manage inputs. Can you talk about why that's a key one here?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the previous 2 is I may know how much I spent on, Roundup for an entire crop, an average per acre on what I spent. But if I look at how many sections I have on a sprayer, or if I look how a field's actually laid out, I actually spent more of that on certain fields. So there's no way to know that unless you're actually utilizing your technology or your data and looking at your as-applied maps, but starting to track those costs on a field-by-field basis. And even if we don't do field-by-field basis, if a grower doesn't even know that granularity on a crop basis, that's our starting point. And then we might move to a farm basis, and then we might move to a field basis, and eventually we want to get to a zone basis And it would be really crazy to think we could get to a plant basis, but our goal is to get them to that zone basis, to where now, instead of viewing it at a farm or field level, I'm viewing it at a zone level, that has similar soil characteristics and yield potentials. Most sprayers that were around these days already have some type of section control. They already have a guidance system in it, whether they're using it for auto steer or just to collect the as applied maps. But just like that yield data, that data seems to stay static on the display, never gets pulled off. And a lot of times growers will say, well, I would love to have that data just from a record keeping standpoint. So if I am audited by someone and have to prove that I did spray it on this day in these weather conditions, that I have that. But I think it's even more important than that. I think we should be using it to track our costs versus just a record keeping tool. So utilizing the technology that the growers already have is definitely step one.
Daniel, can you touch on the importance of using farm software?
The farm software that we use, Trimble Ag software in a lot of different capacities. And the really nice thing is, wireless data transfer, it gives you that insurance policy, to where if I'm out there harvesting a field and my combine catches on fire, we all know that rarely happens. But, a couple years ago, we had it happen to one of our farmers, and he had, a whole entire season's worth of data on the combine, and it was literally up in smoke. So if he were to have something like wireless data transfer, we would have been able to actually have that data stored on the cloud and been able to use it. The other neat thing about farm software is, as we start to progress into a new technology age, cloud computing is a big thing. So having other people be able to enter in data for you as a complete task versus having to sit down at the end of the year and enter in 12 months worth of work, I think is really important too, because it stores it all in one spot, but it gives us all a platform to collaborate on.
Are a lot of the growers you work with using the mobile app?
One thing that we always do for our growers are create what we call a farm book, and it's nothing more than a bound book with our GIS maps in them. And that's always been a big hit, especially for some of our peanut growers, because they're using the same AB lines multiple times throughout the season. So being able to identify those with some type of nomenclature for that field, depending if they have 10 different operators, that operator knows exactly what that field's called, is helpful. And we're starting to transition those farm books into the mobile app, because now, instead of having to carry around a paper copy of a book, everybody or most people nowadays have smartphones. So being able to pull up our mobile app and being able to view those maps on our phone has been super helpful.
Great, thanks. Now, how does this tie into the value of as-applied maps?
I think for the as-applied maps, we generate some prescriptions for growers, whether they're fertilizer or nitrogen or seed prescriptions. And that's good. I say, okay, this is what I'm actually doing in the field. I put that in a display. But sometimes what I put in the display, depending on the swath width of my machine or the capability of my meters, if I'm shooting for a population of 32,000, my as-applied map might say, hey, I actually planted 33,000. Well, the farmer has no way of knowing that unless they were actually able to keep up with it themselves or be able to look at it with a map. And I think that's the importance of as-applied map, is it's real data, right? It's telling us exactly how much I spent in that field. And it can also help me make equipment decisions in, maybe I don't need to go that fast while I'm spreading, or maybe I need to spread at least this minimum amount because I can see it's jumping back and forth as I switch gears. Maybe I need to do nozzle by nozzle section control versus section because I'm leaving X amount of dollars in the field, or row clutches. I'm spending 20% more on seed than the acres that I have. And the as-applied map, just like a yield map, actually helps us to paint a picture of maybe a spot in the field didn't perform like we wanted it to, not because it shouldn't have, but because of an equipment error or an issue that occurred in the field, because maybe somebody missed a spot. And back in college, I worked on a farm and I sprayed what I was told to spray. But unless they told me to spray a certain area of the field, I wouldn't. And sometimes farmers forget, to tell you which field to go to, and it just happens to get missed. And I think with an as-applied map, it helps everybody to have a good line of communication in the field, but it also helps to record keep on what actually happened.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And using our displays that are in the field and sending them back to our farm software, in my point of view, is very important.
Okay, let's finish off with this point 4. This last point about being willing to adopt change. I love the quote here. Can you go through that and sort of tell me why is that so important?
Yeah, whenever we go and talk with new growers that we've never worked with before, or growers that we've worked with for the past 8 years, there's always some resistance to change, and it's no different than you and I, somebody coming to my door to sell me a home security system. Well, I already have a home security system. Why should I change? And that's the battle that farmers face as well, is, well, what's the point of changing? Like, prove to me that it's actually going to work, because I've tried all these snake oils in the past, or people have promised me X, Y, and Z in the past and never have fulfilled on it. So how are you any different? And that's always hard for us. But I think if you can find a farmer and start to build that relationship, and they are willing to adopt change, I think that's crucial to becoming more successful in the future, especially as it relates to farm profitability, because there's so many different ways of achieving the same goal. So the quote I put on there was one I got off the internet. I've seen before that says Albert Einstein. But the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So if farmers are still doing flat rate and expecting higher yields, or they're not changing up their varieties in the field, they're using the same variety year over year, do they really think they're going to get different results? If in North Carolina, if every third year I'm expecting a hurricane, and every 5 years I'm expecting to have a bumper crop, then in between those I have 3 average years, and one might be a drought. So if I'm going to have 3 bad years and only 2 good ones, I need to start to play the average, and instead of hoping that every year is going to be a good year, I got to try to be a little bit smarter and start to be a little bit more flexible and adopt different philosophies to help me stay profitable and stay in business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And this last point, assess flexibility in different production scenarios. Does that sort of speak to that point as well?
It does. You hear some folks say, have a plan and make sure that you work your plan. And I think it's always good to make sure that you have a plan in place. And things are always going to happen that are going to try to derail your plan, whether it's rain events or hurricanes or, breakdowns. So being able to say, okay, this is just how it is. Can I access that flexibility and do something different as it relates to production? One grower this year has always used a knifing rig to put on their nitrogen. And the thing with the knifing rig is you have to go pretty slow, and it only covers, let's say 8 rows at a time. Well, they have a 90-foot sprayer sitting at the shop, and you know, that's a piece of technology that they could utilize, because we had a lot of rain this season, and it was tough to actually get across the amount of acres that they had before it got too tall and we weren't able to put nitrogen out. So we sort of did an audible and bought some drops to go on that 90-foot sprayer to help with the application of the nitrogen on their corn. And it was amazing to see how many more acres that we could cover, but also how much better of a production practice it was using the drops versus actually knifing it into the ground. And now, you know, this grower is talking about selling off its knifing rigs and just using the sprayer. And I think things like that, being able to actually say, I've never tried that before, but I'm willing to try it, it makes sense, is always nice to see, because, you know, change is hard. And if you're flexible and you have good partners beside you that you can trust, then I think that's important, especially when it comes to a job like farming.
Great. Thank you so much for taking us through this, Daniel. This has been really helpful. If you have any additional questions about this topic or any solutions from Trimble Agriculture, please don't hesitate to reach out to us by phone or by email. The contact information is here on the screen. I'd like to thank all of the viewers who were with us today, and also just a reminder to come back for our March webinar. We'll be giving you a heads up on the topic later this month through our website, in our newsletters, and via social media. Thanks again, and see you back here in March.